The American criminal justice system has utilized its power through policy to recreate and maintain social order and control of blacks in American society upon the emancipation of slaves. The span of this begins with the abolishment of slavery and the beginning of convict leasing with penal farms and labor camps. And it's followed by, the immigration of blacks moving from the South into the Northeast, West and Midwest regions while facing economic disparities, being zoned into ghettos. And then lastly, capping it off with mass incarceration and through the war on drugs and mandatory minimums. After slavery was abolished, you had somewhere around over 4 million blacks free now in these, formerly slave states. And they, had to live side by side, from that point on with around 8.5 million whites who just recently owned them. So, these free blacks now made up a very significant percentage of the population, being 35% in these southern states. So, a lot of these slave owners and a lot of these, government officials within these southern states was, trying to formulate a plan of, what to do with all these free blacks. They weren't going to live with them, not side by side at least, with equal class. Oh no. With the help of plantation owners and state legislators, policy was created, to go back and, reestablish, control of blacks, which was convict leasing. Now, this was done as early as 1844 in Louisiana, but, not to this degree of, locking away so many blacks. They were able to do this using like black codes, which were pretty much laws that kind of restricted blacks from free movement to go and seek employment. So they'll be forced to only work with the slave owners within their region. Not only did this control blacks, but this created a whole new lucrative system for, Southern white society again. Blacks bottlenecked and densely populated in their communities was left vulnerable to, unrighteous arrest. They was charged with crimes for like vagrancy or homelessness, loitering, if they even did something. One of the reasons we covered in our history class was, a white man can stop you and ask you how much money you got in your pocket, and depending on what you said, if you had money, he could accuse you of stealing it. If you ain't had no money, shoot, you can just be accused of being, a damper on society. Enough to take your ass, enough to go to jail. Once convicted, blacks was, sentenced to long stints of servitude. The goal of this was to keep blacks in an inferior, lower class, while lucratively excluding them from white society. Now, by 1916, the black population in the South had grown to like 6 million. Looking for better job opportunities and less racial shit to put up with, blacks began to move to, the Northeast, Midwest, and West regions. This is arguably one of the most rapid, forms of immigration in history. With the large amount of blacks making their way into the North, you had European immigrants as well as white Northerners who was very reluctant to integrate with this new demographic. Strategies were used to ostracize yet simultaneously exploit blacks' desperation for employment. Blacks were discriminated against home loans, faced with redlining and zoning laws, as well as constrictive covenants, which are, pretty much clauses in property contracts that keep property owners from doing business with blacks. What this did was put blacks in one area and whites in another area, and ultimately caused a shift from an industrial occupation to a suburban service economy. Policy was then implemented to repress racial threats. This led us back to a new prison system to control blacks. I believe that social order was the incentive for the containment of blacks in ghettos. It protected whites from social contact while sustaining the availability of black labor. Now, this new implementation of policy to control blacks Mass incarceration. Proposed by President Nixon and heightened by the Reagan administration, the war on drugs was implemented during the late 70s and 80s. Drug arrests rose 126%, with blacks being 27% of that. Another law brought in by the feds was the 100-to-1 ratio. This was the ratio of 1 gram of crack coming out to 100 grams of cocaine. If you got caught with 5 grams of crack, you can get 5 years. If you got caught with 500 grams of cocaine, you can get 5 years. You might be thinking to yourself, well, so what? The thing is, crack was very much known as the cheap man's drug, and cocaine was the rich man's drug. Crack was very, very easily accessible and very cheap. So you can pretty much argue that this law is discriminatory because there's somewhat of a class attachment to each drug. There ain't a lot of rich blacks during this time, and there are a lot of rich whites. Not to mention lower economic communities and ghettos were targeted. It's not like the police would see 5 white guys standing outside of Studio 54 and say, all right, line them up, as opposed to on 73rd and Halsted, you see 5 black guys during this time. That would very much so happen. By the time we get to 1998, 74% of all drug possession crimes are blacks. With confining devices like ghettos, the government has been able to utilize tactics like criminal records to keep blacks within their socio-spatial cage. Concluding all this, the main question is, so what? So I've been hearing the past couple of weeks. The first thing we can do is unprivatize prisons. The war on drugs created that demand, and since then we have just never let our foot off the pedal. Also, we need to take more strides towards preventative strategies as opposed to defensive ones in regards to convictions. What comes along with that is diligence and community policing. If we had more police that knew the community in which they worked in, then the chances for them to want to help that community would be greater, as opposed to just a cop who live out of town who just coming in to do his job. To me, I don't feel like that police officer is coming to help. He coming to bust somebody. The second thing I believe that will break this long timeline of social inequality is the inclusion of economic equality. Small black business owners in the ghettos should be able to get Head Start tax breaks. Black homeowners in lower economic communities should be able to get Head Start property tax breaks. Policy should be implemented for more blacks to be able to get business loans. Not just small business loans, but like for real business loans. Just keeping it all the way 100. I feel like the government is more willing to give me $120,000 to go to a university over giving me $120,000 to start my own business with the same credit score. So the only difference I can think of it being is if I graduate, I'm going to be in debt. But if you give me that bread, I can mess around and flip that, within a couple months to a year and be out your pockets, and alleviate myself from that social order. But to cap it off real quick, I just want to say something about the mud seal theory, which is a belief that in order for there to be an upper class, there must be a lower class. My belief is that the American criminal justice system has utilized its power through policy in order to keep the mud seal theory true. And in order for this boundary of social control and social order to be broken, I believe that more preventative measures towards reducing recidivism as well as conviction need to be strategically implemented in the American criminal justice system, as well as the inclusion of economic equality for blacks within the American society. Thank you.